Welcome back to our Walk in Christ. Well, today we're going to talk about Jonah, called to the enemy. This is going to be a 3-part series. Part 1, we're going to talk about being called to the enemy. Part 2, we're going to talk about the lessons that we can learn from prayer and what drives us to prayer. And then lesson 3, we are going to talk about what happens when we actually do confront the enemy. So with that, let's go ahead and get diving on in. We're going to go through all of Jonah chapter 1. So if you have your Bible handy, you'd like to follow along, turn to Jonah, a small little minor prophet in the Old Testament. We're going to be doing all of chapter 1. I'm reading from the NASB Bible, but you can certainly read from whatever Bible you like the most. So let's go ahead and dive right on in here. We're going to have a look at Jonah 1:1-3. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, "Arise and go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me." But Jonah rose up to flee from Tarshish, from the presence of the Lord. So he went down to Joppa, found a ship sailing, which was going to Tarshish, paid the fare, and went down into it to go with them into Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. And so we have a few things to point out before we dive much deeper in here. Where is the city of Nineveh from? Well, if you will remember your pre-flood Genesis, this is a city that predates the flood. Genesis 10:8-11, Cush became the father of Nimrod. Great. How wonderful a name is that. And he became a mighty one of the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel. So he created Babylon, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the lands of Shinar. From there he went forth into Assyria and built Nineveh and Rehoboth, and Calah. So here we have Assyria. The Nineveh is the capital of Assyria. Of course, we have Babel, capital of Babylon. Both of these two nations, which eventually judged Israel, both come from the same person, and that being Nimrod. So that is where the understanding is. Of course, Joppa itself holds a little bit of significance. Acts chapter 10, verse 5. Now dispatch some men to Joppa and send for a man named Simon, who is also called Peter. And verses 19 and 20, while Peter was reflecting on the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Behold, 3 men are looking for you. Get up, go downstairs, and accompany them without misgivings, for I have sent them myself." So what's going on in these sections here in Acts? Well, this is Peter, and this is before the time that any apostles or any preaching was explicitly done to the Gentiles. All preaching at this point in time is done to the house of Israel. Okay, and Peter, the apostle Peter, he is in Joppa at a tanner's house, on a house by the sea in Joppa, which is a port city. He's hanging out there on the roof, and God gives him a vision. And it's the vision of all these animals coming down, and God says, "Get up, kill, and eat." And he says, "I will not. I have never eaten anything unclean." And God says, "Don't ever call something unclean which God has made clean." The idea here is to challenge the laws, challenge the norms, challenge the cultural acceptance of various things. We have a lot of things in our culture that would look bad for a Christian to go in and participate in. Now, we have to walk this line. We don't want to go somewhere and participate in sin. We don't want to go to like a drug-filled rave or something and rave for Jesus. That generally is not going to end well. But there's not a problem with us going to some of the darker sides of the world in order to go and, as Jude says, pluck some brands from the fire. And Peter is up here on the roof praying and meditating, and God gives him this thing which causes him to challenge the norms in his Jewish law, but not the requirements of the Bible itself. And of the Christian view, the modern, like, New Testament covenant era itself. And so what he does is he's sitting on the house up here, and then when God lifts this up, this is when these men are coming to look for him. Well, these men are from Cornelius, a Gentile centurion who was dedicated to the church. And so he was actually there serving the real God, and God sends him through a prophet to get Peter, and Peter is going back now to preach to the Gentiles, the forbidden people, the people that these guys, I mean, the only people that the Israelites hated more than the Gentiles were the Samaritans. I mean, at least it wasn't a Gentile Samaritan or anyone, but he ends up going out with them because he is called. So here we have a New Testament and Old Testament case where a person is called out of Joppa to go and preach to what was considered the enemies of the people. And that is an interesting take, that God does call us to the enemies. So it begs these questions. Of course, there's a lot of things going on with grooming kids. We've talked a lot about that. There's all these drag queens coming up. There's a new attorney general in Michigan, which is now saying, hey, we need drag queens in every school. I mean, hey, some schools have police resource officer. We have the resource drag queen. That's all we need. A crazy guy dressing in woman face to preach to all of the girls. But the fact of the matter is, we are called not necessarily to go and ridicule this community, but called into the community. Are they our enemies? Maybe, maybe not. We are called to go into the enemy territories. Are our enemies right now China or Russia? Are our enemies the people on the left? Who are our enemies? We are called to them. And that's the lesson that we get here from Jonah as he is called out to different people. Now, in this, it says that he goes out and he gets on a ship at Joppa, and he floats over to Tarshish. So here is a little illustration here. And so Israel is right about where the second P is kind of where Jerusalem is at. So presumably he's probably in Jerusalem at the time he hears this call from God. He heads over to Joppa. Now, he should have just head straight for Nineveh because God says go up to Nineveh, but he doesn't. Instead, he gets on the boat at Joppa and goes to Tarshish, as far away from the known world as possible. What is it? This is next to Portugal. Okay, he's going way far away, 2,500 miles away. So God says go to Nineveh, to the enemies, and he says, I'd rather go to the edge of the earth. And how many times do we say the same things? God calls us to go to some people that we don't understand, that we don't like, and those people would probably rather see us dead. However, God says, go. And we have to go. And he gives us the reason there in verses 1 through 3. He says, the cry against the city. Okay, this is meant to warn that this would mean God could forgive them. Assyria was the chief enemy of the Jews. This is literally the capital. Now, this book is happening around 775 BC. It was only about 50 years later, in 722 BC, that the people were carried by Nineveh away into exile. So 50 years after this prophecy had occurred, these people were actually carrying them away into exile. So, of course, Tarshish is far away from one could get there. We've already talked about that. So let's go ahead and have a look at verses 4 through 6. The Lord hurled a great wind on the sea, and there was a great storm on the sea, that the ship was about to break up. And then the sailors became afraid, and every man cried to his God. And they threw the cargo which was with the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone below the hold of the ship, laid down and fallen sound asleep. So the captain approached him and says, how is it you're sleeping? Get up and call on your God. Perhaps your God will be concerned about us so that we will not perish. So what's all this about your God and my God and this God and that God? Well, you have to understand the world of this time ran under a principle was called hemitheism. Okay, hemitheism, basically think of hemisphere, portions, divisions. The prevailing thought in theology at this time is that there were all these different polytheistic gods, and these gods were gods over the territories. And when for example, the Philistines and the Israelites were battling, it was really a battle of the two gods of the regions, and if one of them won, it means mean that the god overpowered the other one. And so everyone's calling on their own god, saying, hey, which god do you have? Well, they find out that he is the Israel god, and everybody's terrified about this, as we will see in a bit. This is because, while everyone had this idea about all these gods, there was like this Israel god, man, he seemed to dominate everybody he wanted to. It was kind of weird. And so in this, the sailors are used to storms. These are hardened sailors. They're not like, oh, a storm's coming. Yeah, cool, storm's coming. let's get out there and play in the tornadoes. Why not, right? But this particular storm was especially dangerous. How do we know? Well, they're throwing their cargo overboard. Where else do you remember them throwing cargo overboard? Well, it's thrown overboard about the time that the ship carrying Paul runs aground on the island at Patmos, I think. And so as they're running aground, they know they're going to hit the shore. They cast off all of the cargo, all of the tackle, all of the food. They cast it all off to lighten the ship, which will allow it to ride higher and possibly land on a sand reef instead of on some rocks. And if you don't know the difference between landing on sand reef and landing on rocks out there in the sea, oh yeah, it's pretty big. Just traveling back from Maine, and there was this one little tiny island sticking out there in it's not the Bay of Fundy, it's one of the other bays in that general area out where Quoddy Point is, and there's this one little tiny island that it's like you could walk it in 5 minutes. It has sunk more ships than you can possibly imagine because it's this sharp ping of rock that comes out. And that's the type of thing. So they're concerned. So they're throwing over all their things to lighten the ship. They're like, after all of this kind of stuff, and they're like, I don't know what's going on here. They come to this conclusion. This is of the gods. We all got to pray to our gods. They say this is of divine origin. So then we're going to get into the principle of casting lots. Which I believe might be the next section. Yes. For some reason, it's my notes are slightly out of place here because like they cast lots. Well, that's in the next section there. But basically, they were called to all hands on deck. But here's Jonah down there sleeping. Who else was sleeping on a boat in the crazy sea? Jesus. Neither one apparently had anything to worry about. Of course, Jonah was just too foolish not to worry, and Jesus just knew that he could calm the storm at any time. So whatever that's worth. Verses 7 through 10. Each man said to his mate, come, let us cast lots, that we may learn on whose account this calamity has struck us. So, of course, somebody is responsible for this storm. We got to figure out who it is. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah, and they said to him, tell us now, on whose account has this calamity struck us? What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you? He said, I am a Hebrew. I fear the Lord God of heaven who made the sea and the dry land. And they're like, oh, we're in trouble. The men became extremely frightened. They said to him, how could you do this? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord because he had told them. Maybe that might be on the questionnaire at the start of the boat trip. Are you fleeing from your God? Please do not enter the boat. All right. You're fleeing from your God. Don't come aboard here. We don't want you here, actually, believe it or not. Now, they cast lots to figure out who is responsible. This is not too far out of the ordinary. There were times, Old Testament, New Testament, casting lots. Acts 1:26. They drew lots for them, and the lot fell to Matthias. He was added to the 11 apostles. Of course, this is after the ascension of Christ. There's now only 11 apostles because Judas decided to go and hang himself. And so they had to determine who else should replace Judas and be the 13th apostle, really. I mean, there are 14 apostles. You guys realize that, right? There's 14. Paul's the 14th apostle. All right. You had 12 apostles. Judas, of course, dies. Matthias takes over. He's the 13th. Paul comes in as the 14th. But anyway, they set these requirements here in Acts 1. They said somebody had to be somebody from the very beginning of Christ who's always with us, who is of good character. They brought 2 people forth, and then they cast lots, and lots found to Matthias, which we don't know anything else about Matthias. But the principle is that lots are something that was cast. We saw an Old Testament example, 1 Samuel 14:38-43. Of course, what's happening here is that there is a battle, and God is not showing favor to the Philistines, and Saul seeks to figure out why. Saul said, draw near here, all you chiefs of the people, and investigate and see how this sin happened today. For as the Lord lives, who delivers Israel, though it is in it is in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die. But not one of the people who answered him. Then he said to all Israel, you shall be on my side, and I and Jonathan my son will be on the other side. And the people said to Saul, do what seems good to you. Therefore Saul said to the Lord, the God of Israel, give a perfect lot. And Jonathan and Saul were taken, but the people escaped. So he's like, I'm going to go ahead and figure this out, guys. All right, I got it figured out. I'm going to put me and my son over here and the rest of you rabble over there. And the lot falls to them. Oh boy. Jonathan and Saul were taken, but the people escaped. Saul said, cast lots between me and Jonathan, my son. Jonathan was taken. So Saul said to Jonathan, tell me, what have you done? And Jonathan told him, I indeed tasted of a little honey with the end of my staff that was in my hand. Here I am. I must die. So, of course, Saul issued a proclamation that nobody is allowed to eat, declaring a fast until the enemies were conquered. However, you have to realize Jonathan was not here at the time that this oath was made. He's actually over winning a great battle for Saul. He doesn't hear, he rejoins the army, he sees some honey, nobody else is eating it, he dips the staff in, eats some of the honey. People are like, dude, what are you doing? The king has declared a fast. He says, what? Why? See how my eyes are brightened by eating this honey, is what he says. Of course, Saul is a coward, so he does not put Jonathan to death, even though he swore Jonathan would go to death. This is why Saul's really a bad king. But the principle here is that the lots it was an Old Testament thing. It was a New Testament thing. The idea is that the lots, or it could be seen as the dice. God is rolling everything, and so you're asking God which one to do, and you go ahead and roll the lots. All right, so they were terrified when they learned he was fleeing from the Hebrew God, so they had to understand his power on some level. All right. So we have to recognize, I had a weird note there. We had to recognize that even though these people didn't necessarily believe in the Hebrew God, at the same token, they understood his power, and this terrified them for what they were doing. Now, in this, we have to recognize that there's different ideas or different principles people have, and understanding some of those is certainly worthy of doing. Let's carry on, verses 11 to 14. They said to him, what shall we do to you as that the sea may become calm for us? For the sea was becoming increasingly stormy. All right. He said to them, pick me up and throw me into the sea. Then the sea will become calm for you. For I know that on account of me, this great storm has come upon you. However, the men rowed desperately to return to land, but they could not, for the sea was becoming even stormier against them. Then they called on the Lord and said, we earnestly pray, O Lord, do not let us perish on account of this man's life, and do not put innocent blood on us. For you, O Lord, have done as you pleased. So these people who do not know the real God recognize the power of the real God, and they recognize that the servants of the real God are indeed speaking for him. All right, they did not want to throw Jonah over, but they knew they could not escape. They prayed for deliverance of their sin. So it begs that question, if you're out at sea and one of you dies, is it okay to cannibalize the body? Bores in those ethical questions. Is it really a sin if Jonah said to throw him overboard? Have they committed sins? All right. So this is certainly a principle we have to keep in mind. It's driving me crazy that I wrote a few extra notes in there to mention specifically today, and I can't read part of my writing, mostly because the pen I was using was a little bit kind of crazy here. I have no idea what that word is. We called to be something to the enemies. All right. Anyway, we'll not worry about that line there. We'll just wrap up with the notes that I can read. How's that sound? All right. Jonah 1:15 through 17. So they picked up Jonah, threw him into the sea, and the sea stopped its raging. Then the men feared the Lord greatly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the stomach of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. So one of the things we notice here is that these people who do not otherwise intrinsically believe in the real God, they do recognize his power at the one hand, and in throwing Jonah over the sea and the storm calms down, now they made sacrifices and vows to the one true God. And so is there not a little bit of sacrificial evangelism going on here? And should we not seek to be the same way? We talked, was it this week or last week? I think, I forget which week it was, on the Daily Walk, where we talked about Telemachus in the arena. He goes in and he dies in the arena. And since that time that he died, not a single gladiatorial game has ever been held in Rome. And so there is the principles to Jonah. So he is called to the enemy, yet still he escapes. In his escaping, glory is brought to God in that the people see the power of this one true God. And at the same time, seeing this power, the results of throwing him overboard, calming the sea, made them all make vows and sacrifices to the real God. And so as we are called to the enemy, even if we try to flee, and it's better that we don't flee, it's better that we recognize the calling of God in our life. We have to understand that God can work in all this. Now, this is a very unusual prophet. Number one, this is the only prophecy to be given to a foreign nation. In the Old Testament prophecies, all of the other prophets were either given to Israel or Judah. Actually, I take that back. I think one of them was to Edom as well. I'm not 100% sure about that. I have to check my notes. But this one is the only prophet that I reckon that I can see that goes out to a foreign nation and the foreign nation repents. I think that is what I was trying to say there. And this is also the only prophet listed who attempts to resist God's command. Now, the only other person who did is Moses. He's more considered the law, not necessarily the prophet. Some things would say he's a prophet. Moses did also attempt to resist the command, albeit a slightly different way. But in Jonah here, we have a prophet who actually does resist to the point where he flees. Moses went along with it more or less reluctantly. And so we have a little bit of principle there. So if God calls us to our enemies, the best thing that we can do is to listen to God, be obedient to God, and follow along. All right. So God calls Jonah to the chief enemies. We are called to be the preachers to our enemies today, even if they don't hate us and want to kill us and send it in exile. People who disagree with our ideas, people who disagree with our principles, these factors, we have to recognize the importance of following God and preaching the gospel. The Christian life is not just about going out there and becoming saved and then isolating yourself in a little Christian bubble and never associating with anybody else. So there's all those dirty people out there. No, we have to get out there and preach the gospel with love. So next week, we are going to continue on with Jonah chapter 2, and we're going to talk about a man learning how to pray. Well, if you'd like to help support the channel, we do have some support links and some affiliate links over on the website, ourwalkinchrist.com. Sign up for the newsletter over there, and if you head on over to the learn and support tab, I have some affiliates and such down here as well that'll help us out as well. So thanks for watching, everybody, and I hope that you enjoy your daily walk in our Lord.